Hello everybody, I'd like to welcome you to another StCheck software training video. My name is Rick, I'm one of the support technicians here at StCheck, and today we're going to be talking about how to troubleshoot connectivity errors with your clients. So when you have clients listed in your SBAdmin GUI window or in the web interface and they've got those red dots by them and you don't know how, I'm going to step you through the things that you need to check to get that connectivity up and working. So first off, let's talk about why this happens. The biggest reason that we see connectivity issues occur is that there are too many chefs in the kitchen, so to speak. In a lot of environments, there are multiple system administrators, and far too often they don't communicate very well with each other. So one person will do one thing, and then one person will make a change that will undo what that person did. Additionally, when you're looking at communication over a network, and we're pretty much specifically talking about the network edition of our software right now, there are many different pieces that can affect connectivity, and that could be anything from a firewall to an unplugged network cable, host name resolution. There are just a lot of different places where things can go wrong. The one piece that I can pretty confidently say now, though, is that 99% of the time the problem lies outside of StCheck software. We get several times, I personally get several times a week, trouble tickets where the person says your software isn't working, my client can't back up to the server, I get the little red dot, and the first thing I ask them is, do you have a firewall configured? And almost without fail they say, no, of course not. That would not make any sense. And then it can be a day, it can be a week. I've had tickets last 2 months, and finally, after just banging our heads against the wall day after day, we find out, oh yeah, somebody who wasn't in the loop went and installed a firewall somewhere, and that's why the software wasn't communicating correctly. So 99% of the time it's going to be an outside of our software problem, but that doesn't mean it's not a problem. You still can't run your backups. So I want to make sure you have the tools that you need to diagnose where the problem is so that you can go to your network guy and say, hey, this is what's going on, and you're telling me it should work, but it's not working. Let me show you why. So let's go through what we're going to do in today's demo. The first thing we're going to do is troubleshoot client communication through a variety of different clients, and I have set up several different problems that we see a lot. So I'll show you how to diagnose those and then how to correct them. Also, I'm going to take you through the process of adding a new client. There's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it. And then finally, we're going to talk about some best practices in your own setting, in your own environment, that you can follow that will help you use our software more effectively and be more prepared in the case that you do have a disaster from which you need to recover. So with that said, we are going to go ahead and jump in here. Now, this is going to cover some of the most common issues. It's not going to cover anything. And just to lay down the groundwork, we do have a network edition set up. We've pre-configured the environment so that you don't have to go through that. If you need some help in how to install the software, how to add clients, how to add servers, things like that, check out our other training videos. Those topics have been covered in pretty good detail. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I have a terminal window open here, and I've already SSH'd into Client 1. Client 1 is my admin system. It's the one running the network edition of the SBAdmin software, so I'm going to go ahead and start up the GUI. And you'll notice when I start it up that although I've got a couple greens, a few of these machines are taking a little longer to light up. That means the StCheck software is still trying to establish communication, and eventually it gives up, times out, and says, hey, there's a problem. I can't communicate with these hosts correctly. So that will need to troubleshoot. Before we do that, though, I want to point out one thing. Client 1 is my admin. It is the system running the network edition of the software. However, it is neither a backup client nor is it a backup server. A common misconception is that the admin and the backup server must be the same machine. While this is true for a lot of pieces of software out there on the market, we purposely have kept everything separate so you have maximum flexibility. Now, oftentimes, your admin will be a backup server, but that's because that just happens to be the system with the disk space or with your tape backup drive. The point is that it doesn't have to be. So what the admin does do is that it functions like a control switch, or I liken it to the conductor of a symphony who orchestrates all the different pieces that are going on. Your admin is going to be the one telling your clients over here when to start their backups and where to send their backups to. It's going to be keeping track of any error messages and notifying you of them. And it's going to be keeping track of other things like backup labels, creating boot media, things like that. So it's sort of the guy in charge, but it doesn't have to be the jack of all trades unless you want it to. Now, one thing that we do recommend as a best practice is that you make your admin a client. And that's because since it's your admin, there's probably stuff on it that you would want to recover in the case of a disaster. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. We're going to add it in. So we get this box up that allows us to add clients, and all you have to do is type in the host name. And remember, our host name is client1. You normally don't need to configure any of this stuff. We click Save. Yes, we want to add it. And we're done. This box stays open in case you want to add a lot of clients at the same time. Now we go back over here. The system is essentially querying itself to see if there's good connectivity. And it went green. Great. Everything's working properly. And we know from the little L in the dot here that it is a Linux machine. Just like we know down here that client 3 is an AIX machine. And the little T over here tells us that this client has been enabled for TSM backup. So it has the option of writing to a TSM backup server. We're not going to go into that in this video. TSM is its own whole beast, and we'll do a separate training video for that. And again, it rechecked these clients, still no connectivity with them. So we have some troubleshooting to do. Let's go ahead and start with client 2. Let's get to our terminal window here and try some basic connectivity checking. Let's ping it. Okay, we know we can ping it. And actually, I know we can SSH to it because I have an SSH terminal session set up here. Now, I purposely made it red so that you would be able to keep everything separate. I know this type gets kind of small when you're watching on a recorded video. So red is client 2. So I can ping to it, I can SSH into it. That means I've got basic connectivity. The ping tells me I've got basic connectivity from client 1 to client 2, so there's not a network cable unplugged or something like that. So the first tool that I want to use, and I cannot emphasize enough how important this tool is StCheck. And this will be available on any system where you have STORX software installed. And the way StCheck works is you just tell it to StCheck and then the host name of whatever other client on the network you want to see if you can connect to. So we're on client 2, we want to StCheck back to client 1, the admin, and see what happens. And it responded right away, that's a good sign, and it's telling us the remote host, or client 1, responded, and client 1 said, this is my IP address, 1.246, this is my host name, client1.storx, these are the port numbers I'm using, those are those well-known ports that STORX registered with the IANA, and this is what I, client 1, think that your information is. I think that your IP address is 1.247. I think your host name is client2.storx. These are the ports that you're connecting to me on, and then some group information. This is really handy to do, especially if you're on a multi-home system, just to make sure that the software is using the adapter that you want it to be using. Now that worked, so everything looks good on this side, but let's try going the other way. Just because you can go from one client, in this case from the client to the admin, doesn't mean that we can necessarily do the opposite. So let's do that. StCheck. And we're on client 1, so let's StCheck client 2. Now the first thing I notice here is I don't get a response right away. The timeout is set for 10 seconds. As you know, On a network, 10 seconds is a long time. That's a long time in computer time. It's probably not going to work, and it doesn't. It says connection refused. Well, we know we have a route, so something else is causing that connection to be refused. In other words, the STORC software is not answering on the port that it thinks that it should be. So one of the things that I'm going to check is to make sure that the software is running. I know I installed it on client 2, but let's just check. So psef and grep for strexecd. That's the name of the daemon that stays running in the background when you've installed the client server edition of the software. Well, the only thing I got back from my PS was the command that I just ran. So that tells me that the strexec daemon is not running. That's obviously a problem. No one's home to answer the door. Now, why it's not running, that's a whole different conversation itself. Maybe someone stopped it. Maybe my init scripts aren't set up correctly. It could be a lot of reasons. I'm going to go ahead and start it, and let's see what happens. Okay, it looks like it started successfully. I didn't get any errors. That's good. So let's go ahead and run a PS again, and good. Now I see that the process is running. That's what I wanted to see. So let's go back over to client 1 again. Go ahead and rerun that StCheck. Great, we get a response right away, and it's giving us everything we expected. It's saying I'm client 2, the IP address matches, it knows who client 1 is. Rarely you might get into a case if you've had multiple installations where these don't match. So this gives you good information. The last two pieces here tell us a little bit about what the machine's role is. So client 1 is a valid system admin, and it's not a backup server, which we know. And on this side, if we look up here, client 2 is not a system admin or a backup server, and that's again what we'd expect. So let's go back and check the GUI, and look, there we go. Client 2 is now listed. We've got a nice green dot with an L that tells us it's a Linux client. So that one has been resolved. Client 3 is already running. We know it's an AIX machine. We can skip it. Now let's talk for a minute. I have one more client we're going to add, but first let's talk about this client here called provisioning. Provisioning does not exist yet. What I've done here is I've added the host name of a machine that I want to deploy out in my test environment. Now, when you do that, what you want to do if you're going to be cloning from one machine to another using the SBAdmin software is go ahead and put the host name and IP address in here, and that will sort of reserve its space on the network. The reason you need to do that is when you run the boot media on, in this case, provisioning, you stick that boot media in and you tell it, hey, go to whatever server, whichever server here has the backup image that I need. If we haven't defined provisioning in the administrator, the server is going to reject it. It's going to say, I don't know who you are. You might not be someone who's supposed to have access to this backup. So you want to put that host name in there in advance. That way the server will know which host is contacting it. A couple of reasons why you would want to do this. First off, let's say you've got a machine in your production environment that maybe your developers want to tinker around with, but it's your production server. You don't want them doing that. It's a live server. Well, old school, you would have to go into your development environment, your test lab, reinstall the operating system on a different machine, install your patches, install any custom software, which can take hours. With our software, all you do is run a full system backup of it, create some boot media, go over to that other machine, slip in the boot media, attach it, netboot, whatever you're doing, run a restore, takes maybe 10, 15 minutes, depends on how big your image is, and all of a sudden you've got a perfect copy of that machine now in your test environment, so your developers can do whatever they want to it and you're not terrified. And because it's our software, that machine doesn't have to have duplicate hardware. It can have dissimilar hardware, and we will take care of all that for you. So could have a different video card, different drive configuration, whatever. We'll take care of it. The other reason you want to do this is you're getting a chance to test the recovery. So number one, you know that you're making the boot media and running the backups correctly. Number two, you know that your backups are good, there aren't any errors in them. And number three, you're getting practice. That way, if you do get into a DR situation, this isn't all new to you. You should be doing a DR test, probably, depends on your environment. We see people who do it quarterly, some people do it twice a year, once a year for sure you want to be doing, and not just here, but a full DR plan. So it's a very good part of your DR testing that you practice. All right, I'll get off that soapbox. One more test that we want to do. I'm going to go ahead and let's say I've got a new server that came online and I want to start backing it up. I haven't installed the software yet, but I'm going to add the client in here. I know that its host name is client 4. Now this one actually does exist on the network. It's up and running, but it doesn't have the StCheck software on it yet. But again, we like to put things in here first so that it knows what's coming. Okay, so we see client 4 is grayed out, and it's eventually going to time out and come up red because there's no software on the back end to answer it. So let's go ahead and go over to client 4. And I've got a window up here and see it just turned red. This one's blue, just again for your memory, so client 4 is blue. And I've already downloaded the software, that way you don't have to sit and watch me do that. So let's untar it, so tar xvf in the name of the tar file, and then type /STinstall to install it. I'm not going to go into great detail here, we've got another training video on this, but we know we need to install the client server edition, so hit C. It wants the host name of the admin system, and that is again client 1, and select the defaults. It goes out, tries to contact client 1, says yep, I can do that, everything's correct, let's go ahead and do the installation, and it does the installation. Now normally at this point, this is when I just close down the window because I don't need to be on here anymore. All of my configuration from now on will go on in that GUI interface or on the admin. However, I know because I set up this demo that it's not going to happen that easily. Let's go ahead and look at the GUI. Client 4 is still red. Now, after 10 or 15 seconds, it should have gone out and queried and said, oh, hey, I see that software is there now. I've got good communication, and it should have turned green. It didn't. So there's a problem. Let's go ahead and see. Let's make sure we have network communication from client 1. So we'll go ahead and ping client 4. Okay, ping works fine. So we know we've got basic network connectivity. Let's go back and run our favorite tool, which is the StCheck. So let's StCheck from client 4 to client 1. StCheck client 1. Okay, that came back fine. Now, one thing you'll notice here, it got a response from the remote port. It did not, however, it doesn't have anything filled in for group name and ID. That's because this client has never successfully contacted the admin yet, so it hasn't been assigned a group name or ID. So that we're expecting to see. So we know we've got communication running in one direction, but what happens if we go the other way? StCheck from client 1 to client 4. No route to host. Well, we know that there's a network route because we can ping to it. So what that means is that for some reason, nobody's answering on the port. Now, let's go ahead and do a ps-ef and grep str execd. Okay, we see that the software is running, so that's not the issue. So what it's probably going to be, and again, this is at least 99% of the time when we get this, it's a firewall somewhere. So let's start looking at things. The first thing we want to look at is iptables, especially if this is a brand new install of Linux. Iptables has probably been set to run and to filter out a bunch of stuff. Okay, I run my IP tables and I see that I can accept pings, I can accept some limited amount of traffic, and then, boy, I've got a bunch of stuff rejected. Well, that's going to be a problem because I need to have communication. So let's go ahead and edit the configuration for IP tables to see what's going on in there. So vi etc sysconfig IP tables. Looks like there must have been another network admin playing around with my system here, because the rules I had put in here to accept traffic on ports 5026 and 5027, those are those STORX well-known ports that are registered with the IANA, somebody's gone through and commented those out. So I'm going to uncomment them out, get rid of the pound signs, and go ahead and save it. Now, one thing you need to remember, and I get caught on this all the time, is remember you have to restart IP tables for those rules to take effect. So service IP tables restart. And let's go ahead and try that again. IP tables -L, make sure our rules are listed. And we see that they are listed in here. Great, that's what we wanted. Okay. So did that fix things? Well, let's go back over to client 1. Okay, it looks like we can communicate correctly. However, there's one more problem here, and it's going to show up in this. So not only should you run an StCheck both directions, but also run an StCheck from the client against itself. So StCheck client 4 on client 4. Now, you might not even discover this. In fact, let's go take a look. Sometimes the SBAdmin will show a client as green. Okay, so client 4 shows up as green, but what would have happened if I had run a backup job? Is my backup job would fail. And here's why. If I run StCheck against itself, my machine for some reason is thinking that its IP address is loopback. So when it goes to send off that backup job to the server, it's going to try to send that backup job through that interface. And if you know anything about the way networks work, that is not a routable address. That data is not going to get out. So somebody's been messing around with my hostname resolution. First place to check, of course, is your etc hosts file. And yep, looks like somebody, again, probably that same network admin who was playing around in my IP tables, for some reason added client 4 to the localhost IP address. We definitely don't want that, so let's get rid of that. And oh, look, he commented out my definition that's correct, so let's uncomment that. Write and quit, and there's nothing that you need to restart in this case, so let's go ahead and run the StCheck again. Okay, that looks a lot better. Now the STORX software has the proper IP address, proper host name. That looks great. And we've got a green light over here. So everything is now taken care of, and that gets us through all of our different test scenarios. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. Just to go over what we talked about. First off, if you're getting those little red circles, it's probably a firewall issue. Even if you don't think it's a firewall issue, talk to anybody else in your department, anybody else who would have access to those machines, and make sure they didn't do something, whether it's IP tables, TCP wrappers, rules within your routers that only allow certain types of traffic through, because as I said before, we get tickets on this every week, and almost without exception, there's a firewall somewhere that the person contacting us didn't know about. Second thing, use your tools. So StCheck, that's the big one. StCheck, StCheck, StCheck. It's so handy for getting all that information about, do we have problems doing hostname resolution? Do we have communication on the correct port? Now, if you want to eliminate STORX from the equation, a couple great tools to use are to ping the host name. If you can't ping to the host, we're not going to be able to get to the host. And the other one is to telnet the host name on port 5026. And what will happen is if you have proper connectivity between the server and the client, you will get a response back that says 5027, or the next port up that it wants to bump up to. If you telnet to a host name that is supposed to be running the software and it does not respond with 5027, you've got some kind of an issue of that port being blocked or the software's not running. Couple other things that we see happen sometimes, more rare, make sure that your versions match. For example, if you upgraded the administrator, you need to make sure that all of your clients and servers got upgraded too. If they're not matching versions, there's a good chance, especially if it's a major version change, that they won't communicate with each other. Also, as we saw in one of the first examples, make sure that that strexecd daemon is running. So those are some really good things to work at or to look at. Best practices is make sure your admin is also client and it's getting backed up. And do a provisioning of your machines from something from production into a test environment so that you can play with it, play with the configuration, test your DR plan. Now, for the future, we love your feedback. We want to know what you need to see, what training videos we can put together for you, or what live trainings we can do. And we do those the second Tuesday of every month. Go ahead and send us an email, sba@storx.com, and tell us, hey, I'd love for you guys to give us more training on TSM servers or whatever it is. Let us know. We'll put it together for you. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. If you have not yet downloaded our software, you can get it at www.storx.com/free-trial. And if you want to check out our other training videos, they are all available on our YouTube page at youtube.com/user/StorxSoftware. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you soon.